where the Constitutional Court issued these warning of a risk of a physical and cultural and territory extermination, social extermination that we are suffering in both 115 indigenous populations in Colombia as a consequence of the armed conflict, as a consequence of the government's abandonment and drug trafficking in our territories and communities, and as a consequence of the lack of public policies to guarantee and to prevent this fact that places under risk to all of the indigenous populations inhabiting Colombia. This was a sentence that needed to be fulfilled 3 years after it was issued. That means that if it was issued in 2009, it should have been fulfilled in 2012, the latest. But now we are in 2021, and what has been written in the 004 statement has not been fulfilled for the indigenous populations here inside the country, the indigenous population like the NASA people to which I belong. The judicial decision is clear. We needed to create a national program to guarantee the 115 indigenous populations and to create 34 plans of protection. And with these protection programs, we were going to handle the dramatic situation the indigenous populations are facing, and that we were also going to prevent other events to take place in our communities and territories. We were led by the Ministry of Interior, who had to coordinate with the rest of ministries to go to communities and to go to territories and to talk to indigenous populations in an imminent risk and to build in a joint fashion the safeguards and the mechanisms for prevention. We needed to have assemblies, meetings, conferences, so that we would build all these protection plans. The National Guarantee Program was done, and a very big book was written that talks about the National Guarantee Program, but the safeguard plans were not following the same rhythm. I don't know if my brothers in the Siona population, were you able to have these safeguards? Are they implemented? Or were you left like us, like we were? We started conversations, but when it came to the implementation of the programs, it was just never done for us. In the requirements that we issued to the government, especially for the Ministry of Interior, asking them about these safeguard plans, they just said, they just presented a technical report from assemblies, from conferences, from talks that they've had with us, but they have not started the implementation phase. We did manage to create these safeguards, to state the principles of how we want the government to deal with us, how we want for them to prevent a certain number of aspects, but we have not started the implementation. Everything just was left in written documents, in statements and engagements, but we haven't seen up until now mechanisms or actions from the national government to address the difficult situation that we are facing. With other indigenous populations from the Cauca department, we managed to make a little bit more progress. We even installed and we inaugurated a safeguard plan, but we were never allocated budgets. And you know, brothers and sisters, that a plan can only work if you have budget for it, if you have resources to implement it. Prevention mechanisms work only if you have resources, if you have a budget. Let us say we did do all the conversations. They went to the communities, but resources were never allocated so that these safeguard processes will actually work. So we have plans, we have nice plans with no budget. On the other hand, this is what happened. It's been already about 12 years since the statement 004 was issued. And in these years, we have had a certain number of incidents. In 2009, the Constitutional Court warned of the number of individual assassinations on carried out on indigenous populations. They warned against the massacres that we were experiencing. They warned about displacement populations, about threats, about communities being isolated. But up until now, we have had more killings, more massacres, more people displaced, more people isolated. The Agua population, for instance, from the Nariño department, 15 years ago is isolated. 15 days ago started to be isolated because armed groups that are controlling this part of the country, they just said that no Agua indigenous, no child, woman, or man can leave the territories, or they will be shot on sight because they would be not obeying the law issued by these armed groups that are again controlling the territories. In 2014 and 2016, the peace agreements were signed between the government and the guerrillas. However, this was not implemented, nor was it respected. More armed structures, more armed groups are now present in the territories. To give you an example, in the department, in the Cauca department, there were four fronts of the FARC, but now we have 9 structures, 9 armed groups that are fighting between themselves for territory control. It is a very dire situation for us because the government did not fulfill the 004 decree and did not obey the 2004 decree. They did not fulfill the peace accords. They have not fulfilled the accords that we have signed with them, with indigenous populations. And they have not fulfilled what was promised during our demonstrations. President Duque has not provided the 10 million pesos he promised the indigenous population in 2019. He's about to end his presidency, and he has not delivered on the things that he promised. On the contrary, actually, we see how the indigenous populations are once again, being exterminated, both physically, deprived of our culture and territory. We see how assassinations, selective assassinations continue, how massacres continue, how we continue to be displaced from our territories. And there is lack of public policy. What the court warned about in 2009, the systematic extermination has not stopped. The persecution has not stopped. Displacement has increased, and drug traffickers, multinational corporations, oil companies continue to have a stronger and stronger presence in our territories. So, brothers and sisters from the Siona populations and those who are listening, I believe that we have to start actions of disobedience because the government has not fulfilled their judicial decisions. The government continues to try to dupe us, telling us that they have invested. They're presenting a technical informative report, and it's true they have invested, but they have invested in their general assemblies to have more information. But for their planning, yes, they have invested in that, but they have not implemented anything for us where they are starting safeguards. There are many populations that do have it. We elaborate this with the government. We present this with mechanisms for self-protection, for defense, for territory control, for self-government strengthening of cultural values, of environmental defense, of fighting against drug trafficking, substitution program. We presented all of this in the safeguard plans, but of course, none of this works because there are no resources. There's no budget. And that is the reality for this past 12, almost 13 years since the 2000, the 004 decree. So what do we have to do? The government will not deliver if the Ministry of Interior will not deliver. Well, our only solution is to put this disobedience decrees to prepare our own reports as survivors and to send that to the Constitutional Court. These reports need to be sent to the international community. We need to explore all of the possible mechanisms at a national, at an international level, all the mechanisms that protect the indigenous population to reach the international arena to warn that although there are recommendations from the highest organism of justice in Colombia, which is the Constitutional Court, the government has disregarded it, and that they continue to kill us, they continue to exterminate us. We cannot remain quiet. These are extreme situations that we are facing as indigenous populations. This is what I recommend. This is what I present, my observation, and we need to act. If we do not act, they will continue to kill us. This is a real massacre. They'll continue isolating us, exterminating us, expelling us, displacing us, and these armed groups, drug trafficking and economical sectors continue to grab our territories and to put them at risk. That is what is happening, dear brothers and sisters, and thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Mayor Feliciano, for your words and for sharing that important uh, perspective of actions and what we need to do and what we need to do politically and juridically between populations and the nationalities, indigenous nationalities. The Siona population and the Buenavista area is one of the communities that have been more affected by war because of where they are located across the border. So now we would like to give the word to Taita Maniaguaje, who will be able to tell us about what frustration do you feel? What does the community feel because the government has not delivered? There's a lack of will of a government that has oppressed us, oppressed you, a government that has death policies over the indigenous populations. What is your orientation? We saw that you were active. You were with the indigenous population during the demonstrations. You're very active also from the spiritual side with the younger population. We've seen you resisting from the Siona defending the territory. So, Mayor, what words, how would you say, how would you orient the community in this case? Good afternoon. I would like to first thank God and dedicate got his words that I will now fulfill. And now, my name is Pablo Maniaguaje. I am a traditional authority. I've been listening to what has been said by Brother Feliciano and our indigenous population. We are in the border of the Putumayo River. We have been abused for a long time already. And now that we are listening all of this, and these words strike very close to home for us, just like you, brothers in El Cauca, we are in the same situation. Our population, like you said, we are being exterminated. However, through our spirituality and we continue to fight and we continue to be, thanks to God, the Siona people is not has not been vanquished, but we will continue defending the life of our territories and the right to be ourselves, indigenous populations as we are. My brother, as you know, you have seen our struggle. You saw the indigenous demonstration. We were there in the front line from the moment it started to the day it ended. We continue fighting for our territories, for the life of our indigenous populations. We rose up and we stood up fighting for our territories, fighting for against this abuse by the multinational corporations, by armed groups that are present in our territories. We are really, yes, we are isolated in our lives, in our territories. In this meeting, actually, government institutions don't care about indigenous populations. Thus, we are fighting for our territories. Like you said, we want to have a territory to inherit or to leave for future generations. We hope that the government would be sensitive enough to our situation, but they don't care. Thanks to God, we, as indigenous that we are, in our hearts and in our words, we will continue fighting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor. We need to combine resistance strategies. Resguardo Buenavista has protection measures from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission. As Senator Feliciano, we need to deplete all recourses, to present all the reports, to go international, to document what is happening, and the lack of commitment and fulfillment by the government. We will now give the word to Mario Erazo, coordinator, who will let us know what has been challenged to implement protection agencies with CIDH and what is the relationship with what was mentioned by Feliciano at the beginning on the lack of real commitment. What has been your experience when it comes to demand your rights and what is next? My name is Mario Erazo Yaguaje. I am a territory coordinator from the Resguardo Buenavista territory, a border town in the Putumayo department in the Puerto Asís municipality. The Putumayo River in Colombia, the Resguardo Buenavista and Ecuador, San Jose Huesella community. We have been living in this territory for thousands of years. Our tradition and the culture is the Yahe, the Chagra tea. And since taking into consideration the situation of all the populations in Colombia and the abandonment by the government, and beyond the violence and the armed conflict that we have always had in Colombia, and we have always been in between. And the life of indigenous populations, Afro-Colombian populations, and others, especially us as indigenous populations, we just need to continue resisting. We need to continue resisting to protect the spirituality and the heritage from our ancestors and our community identity. Because when we leave our territories, we also disappear, just like it is stated in the 004 decree. So from there, there are mechanisms that we need to use strategically to protect our territories, to protect our communities, and this is the Indigenous Guard. Since we are indigenous populations and we have been the guardians of these territories since eons, and now physically we need to leave the territories, men, women, fathers and mothers, young and old. We need to learn how to protect our territories. This has been one of the most effective strategies to defend ourselves from the conflict and also from the government, because the only response we have from the government is just force, the use of force, multinationals, corporations, oil companies, and illegal mining, and also government-sponsored mining. So that is what we receive from the government. Therefore, that takes us to a different fight. We need to look for alternatives, look for other places where we can become visible, and other institutions that can ask the government, the Colombian government, what is happening with the indigenous populations. We have depleted the measures that we were able to take in the 004 degree for resistance, but we haven't had any response from any institutions. This led us to present ourselves in front of the Inter-American Community Commission. They gave us a protection measure by which we did not receive a good response from the government and the institutions. We have an experience where through this protection measure and as people that has lived in the Putumayo area for thousands of years, this has to come from the territories where the community is, where there is a spiritual participation, where we feel comfortable to tell the Colombian government and institutions to fulfill their part and the decrees they issue.
Que fueron otorgadas en el 2018, después de un año y medio, se pudo llegar al territorio a una concertación, la llamó
It's been a year and a half and we haven't reached an agreement. The government called them agreement, but it wasn't real for us because they were not able to lead the representations and institutions they have so that these ideas would turn into decisions. They send low profile members of government to these meetings where they are not allowed to sign anything. They don't have authorization to sign anything. And when we demand something in these meetings, for instance, what we have with these institutions, and we give an example, we were saying, what if you were to stay here for 8 days to see how we live, to see what is a real conflict, and why we talk about abandon, so that you can see. Just to stay here for 8 days. And they thought that we were kidnapping them. And they started saying that we were kidnappers. They said that we don't understand anything, that we are ignorant, and that we are demanding our rights. And that, you see, the government has not been responsible and has not thought that this was important. They have procrastinated and procrastinated, left for later. They have a lot of pretexts. And lately, the pandemic was the perfect excuse for the government to say that they can just continue forgetting us. and to forget about the protection measures that were issued to protect their territories. And also, when you have a protection measure, as it is the case, they come to offer things as an institution. They do not realize that it's an order they need to fulfill. If this is what the government is saying, then this is what we offer. No, they do not analyze what a protection measure means. And these are not ideal. They are not drafted as the population needs them, but it's according to what they want, how their policies are, and that does not represent us, and that does not guarantee what we request as the indigenous population that is affected by the conflict and that is affected by everything and all the oil exploitations in this area. So to summarize, since we are in the border, this is the same situation all across the border. What happens in Colombia happens also in Ecuador, and we are being affected from side to side because both in Ecuador and in Colombia, they are saying that we are binational population. Then Colombia says, let Ecuador answer for them, and Ecuador says, let Colombia answer for them. So they say that in Ecuador, there is no armed conflict, that there's no risk, that there is no government abandonment, that there are no armed groups, that nothing happens in there. And we are telling them that we have the same situation. Same situation in Colombia happens also in Ecuador. So sadly, we have these protection measures, and it's been 3 years, but they have not been effective. The decrees have not been made active in our territories, and we request from the Inter-American Commission that they can recommend the Colombian state to do more follow-up and to do something because they are responsible. And the Commission also issues orders, but they don't do follow-up. So I believe that we have to ask for help. Please render us more visible. Help us so that the Colombian government can acknowledge this abandonment because we only have oil companies and police protecting them and armed groups that are forming in our territory. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brother Feliciano Valencia. And thank you to all the organizers and those who are supporting us and for rendering us visible, and for letting our word be spread, our message known. We hope that this will provide good results for us in the future. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to highlight some common points, namely the different impact of armed groups on the indigenous populations. The ONIC report, the National Organization, Indigenous Organization with a historical memory, which is Tiempos de Vida y Muerte, Times of Death and Life, memoir of the indigenous populations in Colombia. There are effects that called a poor or a bad death, because while it is true that forced evangelization and capitalism, war and trafficking are against the vision of the indigenous populations. And this creates several things that link with the armed conflict, and they create threats and robbing them from their territory and resources. There's also an imbalance between individuals and communities and spiritual beings that live in the territories. I would like to now give the floor to lawyer Helen Kerwin, who will now talk a little bit about how this risk of cultural extermination that Feliciano was talking about and that has been acknowledged in the Constitutional Court in 2009 is not something that they are just making up, that it is something real and that affects the lives of communities, and that is also represented in standardized instruments and international protection and human rights instruments. And we would like to talk to you so that we can close this conference. Helen, we would like to give you the floor. Can you please explain a little what is the duty? How can the internal right can be adjusted, and what is the obligation of the Colombian government internationally, because they have not fulfilled the inter-American or international standards to protect the indigenous populations. Thank you, Laura, and greetings for all of you who are part of this conference, and all of you who have participated. And thank you for your question. It is a very good question. Like you say, um, the right to participate in the cultural life and the right to cultural identity are acknowledged in different instruments or international jurisprudence instruments. Recently, also by the Inter-American Human Rights Court, which is the maximum tribunal for human rights in the Americas. In 2020, actually, there was a statement, a very strong statement issued about the existence of this right and its contents. In a case where an indigenous population, La Cajonay in Argentina, in this sentence, the court acknowledged, like you say, that there is a right to participate in cultural life, which is linked to the right to cultural identity, and that this right to cultural identity has to do with indigenous populations, but not only with them, but also has to do with every individual, and especially groups that are considered as minorities, namely the indigenous populations. And what is culture? What is the right to culture? Here, the right gathers what has been said by the Social and Cultural Committee, which is an entity from the UN, where they state that culture must be understood as a interactive process, and in a certain way, an evolutionary process through which individuals and communities can express humankind's culture. It has to take into consideration the individual and collective aspects and social aspects as well. So the right to identity is a right for people to act in an individual or community, and the right to continue with a lifestyle that is linked to their culture, to participate in the development of their culture. It protects the distinctive rights of all these groups, and governments, like you said, have to respect these rights. What does this mean? Well, from one, they need to take all the necessary judicial administrative measures to assign necessary budget in order to fulfill this, and also to protect the right of every person to express and exert their cultural practices. For this, the governments need to implement measures to prevent others to interfere with the right to have participation in cultural life. There are also standards to know uh, other aspects for cultural identity. We need also elements that are near the culture. The Committee for Cultural Rights have talked about the rights of nature, like flora, fauna, and intangible means like culture and tradition of the peoples, of the populations. We need accessibility, which is the opportunity to participate in cultural life. We need acceptability, which means all the laws, policies, and others from the government to ensure the full enjoyment of cultural rights. We need adaptability, which is to be flexible. These policies need to be flexible by the government in order to respect cultural diversity. And they need to be, they also need to be adequate, which pertains to the need to respect culture and cultural rights of individuals and communities, which includes minorities and includes indigenous populations. Finally, I would like to mention that the right to cultural identity and to develop a cultural identity is also linked closely to many other rights. For instance, to the right of to have adequate food that is culturally also adapted, nourishment and food security that respects their culture, the right to clean water, to running water, and is also, of course, linked to the integrity and the personal integrity of people. Thinking a little bit about the risk of extermination that indigenous populations and the Siona population, namely, this protects the right to a cultural identity and to exert this identity. This also has to do with the survival of these very populations. Now, just to finish or to repeat, the government has the obligation to create a surrounding where these rights can be exerted. For instance, all of the laws, policies, and also they have to protect and guarantee the non-interference of other actors in this right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Helen, for providing this juridical, this legal perspective of the rights of indigenous populations can be exerted. We will now like to Mayor Feliciano to have the floor so that you can add to what was said this afternoon, but the strategies, ideas that were generated in the end about disobedience, about the documentation, especially the opportunities for resistance that come when indigenous these political positions for the rights. This starts in my head and in my heart. I am excited to continue working together defending the territories. We would like, Senator, if you could please expand and on this and provide a little further guidance on this. Thank you. I believe that the indigenous populations with this under this resistance position, we need to activate all of the mechanisms that we have handy. I will visited Congress in Onik. We finished the Cauca, and the next week, we have the Congress from the El Valle department. And everybody's thinking, how can we continue resisting so that we can continue surviving as indigenous populations? So, brothers, I believe that we need to talk to our lawyers to prepare this legal action because the government will not do something for us, and we need to do something. I wonder if we are still on time to start this legal action. And we need to have documents. We need to document all these facts for our contempt motion and all the things where the decree 004 has not been respected. What has happened from 2009 onward. We need documents to prove it because we will have a juridical legal fight, and we need to have arguments. The third element is to begin a meeting with a constitutional court so that we can be heard as indigenous populations and those who are, or those who are delegated by us. If we need to go to Bogota, then we need to go there. Or if we need to address the constitutional court somewhere in our territories, we have to do it. But we need to be heard. Third, fourth path that I present is an international action where we will continue talking with CIDH, the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. They came and they take it talking about what happened in the national demonstration. But we need to talk more about the CIDH, about all of these measures, and because it has not been obeyed or fulfilled. We need to talk with IACHR internationally. And the fifth, we need to, and I don't know how to, I have been talking with other brothers. We need to have a special narrator or a journalist to come. Of course, we need to have President Duque so that he can have a special rapporteur for indigenous populations. But we need to explore the possibility. And we need to document it all. Flagship cases, survivors, because we do have them, and continue moving. We cannot stand still. In my case, brothers and sisters, I am already preparing a political control debate for the Ministry of the Interior because they are the ones who have been allocated by the government to fulfill safeguard the Ministry of Justice, or so that they can give us balance of what they have done. I am preparing this, and I will be presented it next year. But we need cases from the 115 and those who have been benefiting from these measures as well. The registry of what has happened in the war, in the intervention, in the risk, because I have cases in Cauca where our doctors were killed, of members of our indigenous populations were killed, where authorities were killed. And that is, it's extremely serious. That was not present in 2009, where the court was issued their statements. But the situation now has became so dire where authorities are killing us, and this is extremely serious. Thus, we believe that we need to render ourselves visible. So what is happening? It's been 2 years since this was decreed. I will start with a debate, of course, a political debate, but we are also preparing an international tour where we will denounce everything that is happening and we will face this that has all the human rights in Geneva, which are really not true when you think about the situation of the indigenous populations. I believe that it is time for us to resist and present this and to be more global. On the other hand, I believe that at least the populations that have benefited, we should have a meeting. I don't know if it will be next year or when, but we need to evaluate, and to have actions. We cannot stand still. We cannot stand still in view of the human tragedy that we are living. This is a real drama. We are being isolated. We are being displaced. Of course, we are resisting. We are in the territory, but they are after resources. They are after our water. They are after our land. In this government, they gave a green light to fracking, and fracking affects all territories. This government gave green light to land gentrification. Basically, they are selling strategic land so that international multinational interests can come and purchase land that is owned by our territories. And that is an imminent risk. And they're going back in the rights where we had already made progress. The battle that we have under this legal framework is the defense of the previous consultation because it has been again attacked. They have another project to regulate what we have because it is the instrument, the most valuable asset that we have to defend our territories. And that is being attacked. So while we are thinking about resisting, these governments are just handing over our territories. They are just attacking the rights of safeguard and protection instruments that we do have. Dear colleagues, I wish that we could have a summit or a meeting, I don't know, something where we can talk. I hope that we could all those who have the protection measures, if we could just uh, join together our efforts and decide what to do. I believe that our resistance has to be also cultural. Our resistance have to use the power of medicine, has to use our knowledge, and we need to think about community work of connections and rituals. It doesn't matter where we are, but we need to coordinate spiritual get-togethers and spiritual wisdom sharing, and to work together with Mother Nature and our motherland, our life, and the planet's life. We do ritual, we do parliaments, we do medicine, but each one of us in our communities. I really hope that we could have a spiritual, cultural, because we need that. And maybe that could need us to resist more, like our brother presented. So I do ask you if we can denounce what's happening if we can denounce what's happening also spiritually and have a social mobilization, because this cannot stop. We need to continue in a permanent mobilization. So I give you that. I hope that we are able to continue this debate. I will prepare mine on a political perspective to see what the government is going to reply, and up to that, we will have to see how we can meet together. But we need to continue. Dear brothers and sisters, receive fraternal greetings from the Cauca region. I do convey my strength, my spirit of resistance, and may we never be silent. Thank you, Senator Feliciano, for your words, your wisdom and guidance. From the technical team of Amazon Frontline, we continue to all, we want to continue with these good ideas in doing what we can, and we continue the debate because, as you say, this is the way. And we do wish to continue thinking of strategies, facilitating gatherings, and thank you for your invitation. We want to continue helping with our creativity and our efforts. As Resguardo Buenavista and the Siona people, we would like to thank you, Brother Feliciano, for all of your ideas. This is, of course, will help us as indigenous populations, and we want to also be part of this debate as you presented, to this visibility at an international level that we can continue. We want to be with you and to continue with communications, and to, as we are growing numbers, also we grow in strength. So from the spirituality, we will also continue to support this, because it is the only way we have to resist and to know what is the point and the visibility that we have in our communities. We hope to continue being in communications, continue from the spiritual side and these spaces as well, to continue forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Taita, Pablo, do you have some closing words? Brother Feliciano, thank you. What you have stated in this assembly. Thank you. Like we have said, as indigenous population, we have our own culture. And if God willing, if our spirituality will help us unite, we will continue fighting for our territories so that we can continue moving forward. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Mario Erazo. Thank you, Senator Feliciano, Helen, the CEJIL, for this space. Thank you for being with us actively, demanding and fighting for the indigenous population's rights. This is all for now. Thank you very much for your participation, and good night.